The wind, a constant companion in the desolate northern reaches, howled its mournful tune, whipping Lyra's cloak around her slender frame. 2 years had passed since the decree of exile, since the gleaming spires of Eldoria had vanished behind her, replaced by the stark, unforgiving beauty of this wild frontier. She lived in a small, self-built cabin, a testament to her resilience, far from any settlement. Her days were a quiet symphony of foraging, hunting, and mending, her nights a silent communion with the stars that had once shone equally brightly over her lost home. Despite the profound solitude, Lyra possessed a quiet strength, an unyielding spirit forged in the fires of injustice. Her eyes, the colour of moss after a spring rain, held a depth that belied her youth, a flicker of intelligence and a carefully guarded vulnerability. Today, however, the silence was broken. A guttural groan, carried on the frigid air, snagged her attention. Lyra, ever cautious but fundamentally good-hearted, gripped the hilt of the small knife at her belt. She followed the sound, her boots crunching on the frosted earth, until she found him. He lay half-hidden beneath a gnarled oak, a figure of shadowed mystery and stark vulnerability. Blood bloomed like dark poppies on his tunic, seeping into the snow. He was tall, even in his crumpled state, with broad shoulders and dark, dishevelled hair that framed a face etched with pain and a certain aristocratic severity, despite the grime. His eyes, when they fluttered open for a brief, agonizing moment, were the colour of deep twilight, intense, guarded, and unsettlingly familiar in their shared burden of sorrow. A primal instinct, born of her own struggle, surged within Lyra. This wasn't the enemy that had driven her from Eldoria, but another lost soul, wounded and alone. Compassion, a dangerous luxury in her exiled life, overruled caution. "Hey," she said, her voice a low, steady murmur, accustomed to speaking only to herself or the forest creatures. "Can you hear me?" He groaned again, a ragged sound. Without hesitation, Lyra knelt, assessing the wound. It was deep, a clumsy sword slash, and infected. He was clearly feverish, shivering violently. The task of getting him back to her cabin was arduous. He was heavy, a dead weight in her arms, but Lyra's strength, honed by years of arduous labour, surprised even herself. She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, through the gathering dusk, the chill biting at her exposed skin. The air grew heavy, pregnant with the promise of more snow. Inside the small cabin, the fire was a cheerful, crackling beacon. She laid him gently on her makeshift cot, the rough animal skins providing some warmth. As she tended to his wound, carefully cleaning it with boiled water and herbs, she studied his face. He was handsome, undeniably so, in a way that spoke of nobility, not of the rugged wilderness. His hands, though scraped and bruised, were long-fingered and refined. Who was he? This silent, suffering stranger she had pulled from the jaws of death. A fleeting thought, cold and sharp, pierced her resolve. What if he was a hunter from Eldoria, come to drag her back? But the thought was quickly banished. His pain was too real, his vulnerability too profound. She had helped him, and that was that. The flickering firelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, painting a scene of quiet, desperate hope. Days blurred into a routine of careful nursing. Alaric, as she learned to call him from the few incoherent whispers he uttered in his feverish state, remained largely unconscious, battling the infection. Lyra brewed herbal poultices, changed bandages, and monitored his erratic breathing. She slept little, her senses heightened, always aware of the stranger in her home. The cabin, usually a sanctuary of silence, now hummed with the quiet tension of his struggle, punctuated by his shallow breaths and the crackle of the hearth. As his fever slowly began to recede, a delicate peace settled into their shared space. Lyra noticed the subtle changes, the return of colour to his pale lips, the steadying rhythm of his chest, the eventual quiet opening of his eyes. Those eyes, when they finally held hers without the haze of delirium, were a startlingly intense sapphire, deep and unfathomable. They held no recognition, only a weary confusion. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice raw, unused. Lyra offered him a cup of warm broth, her movements practised and gentle. "My cabin," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "In the northern reaches. I found you wounded." She offered no further explanations, no questions about his past. She had learned long ago that some stories were too heavy to be shared casually, and some secrets were best left undisturbed. Alaric, despite his weakened state, possessed an inherent dignity. He rarely spoke, choosing instead to observe Lyra with an unnerving intensity. He watched her mend her clothes by firelight, listened to the quiet hum she sometimes sang to herself, observed her skilled hands as she prepared their meagre meals. He noted the way her gaze often drifted to the horizon, a wistful, distant look in her eyes. He saw the scars on her hands, the weariness that sometimes settled in her shoulders, but also the fierce determination that burned bright within her. He was a man of few words, but his silence was not empty. It was a canvas of unspoken thoughts, a labyrinth of hidden emotions. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter danced outside her window, Lyra found him attempting to stand, his face contorted in pain. "Don't push yourself," she warned, moving swiftly to his side. She helped him back to the cot, her touch firm but supportive. His hand, warm and surprisingly strong, briefly brushed hers. A jolt, unexpected and electric, passed between them. He recoiled slightly, his gaze dropping, a flicker of something unreadable, shame, regret, in his deep blue eyes. "Thank you," he murmured, the words feeling weighty, as if torn from a hidden place within him. "For everything." Lyra merely nodded, her own heart a little fluttery. She felt a strange pull towards this quiet and wounded man. He was an enigma, but there was an honesty in his suffering that resonated with her own. As the days continued, a fragile, unspoken understanding began to weave itself between them, a silent pact forged in the quiet rhythm of their shared existence, a delicate truce against the encroaching loneliness. As Alaric's strength slowly returned, so did a keen, almost unnerving intelligence. He began to move with a quiet grace, even in the small confines of the cabin. His questions, when they came, were few but penetrating. He never directly asked about her past, yet he seemed to absorb everything about her present. He noticed the precision with which she loaded her bow, the meticulous care she took with her sparse belongings, the way her eyes clouded whenever the name Eldoria was whispered on the wind, even in distant rumours. One cold afternoon, while Lyra was sharpening her hunting knife, Alaric observed her from the cot. "You handle that with practised ease," he remarked, his voice a low rumble. "Where did you learn such skills?" Lyra met his gaze, her own steady. "The wild teaches quickly," she replied, a hint of steel in her tone. "Or you perish." She paused, then, surprisingly, added, "My father was a hunter too, before we came here." A veil of sadness, fleeting but profound, passed over her face. Alaric's eyes, usually so guarded, softened imperceptibly. "We?" he echoed softly. Lyra looked away, staring into the flickering flames of the hearth. "My family," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We were banished." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain and injustice. "For what?" He pressed gently, his tone devoid of judgment, only curiosity. Lyra finally turned to him, her gaze direct, challenging. "For daring to speak truth to power, for refusing to bend when the powerful demanded silence." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. They called it treason. We called it conscience. Alaric listened, his expression unreadable, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He seemed to carry a world of unspoken thoughts behind his stoic facade. He didn't offer sympathy, but a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the harsh realities of power. This nuanced reaction surprised Lyra. Most people would have recoiled or offered empty platitudes. But Alaric simply held her gaze, a profound empathy emanating from him. "And you?" Lyra countered, her curiosity finally winning out. "What brought you to this frozen land?" Half dead, Alaric looked away, his gaze falling upon a rough-hewn wooden carving of a wolf that Lyra had made. "Some secrets," he said, his voice flat, "are burdens meant to be carried alone, and some wounds run deeper than the skin." His answer, evasive as it was, held an undeniable weight, a sense of profound personal struggle that resonated with Lyra's own. Despite the continued secrecy surrounding his past, their connection deepened. Lyra found herself confiding in him, sharing snippets of her life before the exile, the beauty of Eldoria, the injustice she and her family faced. Alaric listened intently, never interrupting, his silent presence a comfort. He sometimes offered practical advice, surprisingly insightful, on tracking or wilderness survival, hinting at a background that was far more sophisticated than a mere wanderer. He helped her with chores, his strength quickly returning, effortlessly chopping firewood or repairing a loose roof tile. In the quiet rhythm of their days, a delicate thread of affection, born of shared solitude and unspoken understanding, began to weave itself between them, subtly yet undeniably. The cabin, once a symbol of her isolation, now held a glimmer of companionship, a fragile warmth against the unforgiving cold. The brief, deceptive warmth of early spring did little to thaw the icy grip of the north. Lyra and Alaric had settled into a quiet rhythm, a comfortable familiarity that surprised them both. They hunted together, gathered herbs, and shared silent meals by the fire. He was an adept tracker, his senses sharp, his movements fluid and almost unnervingly silent, like a predator, or perhaps a ghost. Lyra found herself looking forward to his quiet presence, to the way his intense gaze lingered on her, a silent appreciation that spoke volumes. The barriers around her heart, carefully constructed over years of solitude, were slowly, imperceptibly, beginning to crumble. One blustery afternoon, as they were checking their snares, they heard it. The distant, unmistakable sound of a royal patrol, the clatter of hooves, the faint echo of shouts carried on the wind. Lyra's blood ran cold. Eldoria's patrols rarely ventured this far, and when they did, it was usually for a specific, grim purpose. Her hand instinctively went to her knife. Alaric, usually so impassive, stiffened beside her, his sapphire eyes, usually so controlled, flashed with a raw, almost feral intensity. A ripple of something, fear, rage, passed through him, swift as a shadow. "Stay down," he murmured, his voice low and urgent, pulling her behind a cluster of dense pines. They watched as a small detachment of Eldorian knights, emblazoned with the royal crest of a soaring falcon, rode past. Their faces were grim, their armour glinting ominously. One knight, a burly man with a scarred face, held up a weathered parchment. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what those were. Wanted posters. Alaric's grip on her arm tightened, his touch almost painful. She felt the tremor in his body, a silent earthquake of emotion. As the patrol vanished, Alaric remained frozen, his eyes fixed on the path they had taken, his jaw tight. "They are searching for someone," Lyra whispered, her voice laced with dread. "They rarely come this far unless—" She didn't finish the sentence. The unless hung heavy in the air. Unless they were searching for her, for a fugitive, for someone dangerous. Alaric finally turned to her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. His usual stoicism was fractured, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen since his fever. "You must be careful, Lyra," he said, his voice unusually strained. "Very careful. The reach of the crown is long." Lyra, still shaken, met his gaze. "I know its reach well, Alaric," she replied, a bitter edge to her voice. "It's what brought me here." The encounter left a lingering unease, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, the silence between them was different, charged with unspoken fears and hidden truths. Alaric was more withdrawn than usual, his eyes distant, troubled. He picked up a smooth, river-worn stone, turning it over and over in his palm, his brow furrowed in thought. He seemed to be wrestling with a heavy decision, a silent war waging within him. Lyra, watching him, felt a pang of protectiveness, mingled with a growing, unsettling curiosity. Who was this man, truly? Why did the sight of Eldorian knights affect him so profoundly? The lines between her isolated life and the world she had fled were blurring, and Alaric seemed to be at the heart of that tempest. The fragile bond they had forged now felt tested, shadowed by the looming presence of the kingdom that had wronged them both. The quiet hum of companionship had been replaced by a thrum of impending drama, and Lyra, despite her fear, felt an undeniable pull towards the storm, brewing within Alaric's enigmatic heart. The scent of wood smoke and damp earth usually brought Lyra a sense of peace, but after the night patrol, it only heightened her anxiety. Alaric had grown even more withdrawn, his silences heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lyra felt a growing tension in the small cabin, a sense of impending disruption. Her instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed at her that something was coming. Her premonition proved correct a few days later. As Lyra was returning from her traps, a figure emerged from the dense forest, not from the usual path, but from deeper within the uncharted wilderness. It was a man, tall and powerfully built, dressed in rich, travel-worn leathers that spoke of wealth and status, rather than the rough homespun of the common folk. He moved with a predatory grace, his eyes sharp as a hawk's, scanning their surroundings. Lyra froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her bow. The man spotted her. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face, revealing teeth too white. Well, he purred, his voice smooth as silk, yet laced with an icy menace. "What have we here?" A little forest sprite, far from her rightful place. He took a step closer. "You're Lyra, aren't you? The banished girl. I've heard tales." Just then, Alaric emerged from the cabin, drawn by the sound of voices. He saw the intruder, and his entire demeanor shifted, his posture straightened, an almost regal bearing replacing his usual quiet stillness. His eyes narrowed, a cold fury replacing the earlier turmoil. "Gareth," Alaric said, his voice low and dangerously controlled, the name a venomous hiss. Gareth's smile widened, mocking. "Brother," he returned, his gaze flicking between Alaric and Lyra, a cruel amusement dancing in his eyes. "You've been harder to find than a summer rose in winter. Our father is most displeased. And who is this little wren you've collected? Playing at being a commoner, are we? How quaint." Lyra's mind reeled. "Brother?" The pieces of a terrifying puzzle began to fall into place. The nobility of Alaric's features, his guarded secrets, his reaction to the royal patrol. And now, this man, Gareth, calling him brother and referencing their father. Alaric wasn't just a wanderer. He was royalty, a prince, the Prince of Eldoria, the kingdom that had cast her out, the very people who had branded her a traitor. A surge of betrayal, sharp and agonizing, pierced through Lyra's heart, eclipsing the fear of Gareth. Alaric, the quiet, wounded man she had nursed back to health, the one she had allowed into her carefully guarded world, was one of them. "She is nothing to you," Alaric stated, stepping forward, placing himself subtly between Lyra and Gareth. His stance was protective, defiant. Gareth laughed, a harsh, humourless sound. "Nothing. She's the daughter of a traitor, brother, a stain on our glorious kingdom. And you, our missing prince, hiding in the wilderness with her? This will make for a most amusing scandal. Come, father has sent for you. He needs his eldest back, especially now." His gaze swept over Lyra with open disdain. "And you, little Lyra, perhaps it's time you returned to the dungeons of Eldoria. I'm sure the royal guard would love a chat with the king's favourite traitor's daughter." Alaric lunged, not at Gareth, but towards Lyra, pulling her behind him as Gareth, with a sudden, swift movement, drew a gleaming dagger. The air crackled with a dangerous tension, the fragile peace of their isolated world shattered by the intrusion of royalty and the painful, undeniable truth. Lyra's heart pounded, a chaotic drumbeat of fear, betrayal, and a bewildering, profound sense of loss. The confrontation with Gareth left Lyra reeling. The shock of Alaric's true identity, a prince, a son of the very king who had branded her a traitor, was a cold, hard blow. Her carefully constructed walls, which had begun to soften under Alaric's quiet presence, now slammed shut with crushing force. Betrayal gnawed at her, a bitter taste in her mouth. She had nursed him, cared for him, let him into her solitary life, and all the while he had been a wolf in sheep's clothing, a royal playing at being a commoner. Gareth, satisfied with planting his poisonous seeds, eventually retreated, promising to return with reinforcements. "Enjoy your little wilderness dalliance, brother," he'd sneered, his eyes glinting. "It will be short-lived." His departure, however, left a vacuum filled with unspoken accusations and a gaping chasm between Lyra and Alaric. Alaric turned to Lyra, his face a complex mosaic of apology, regret, and desperation. "Lyra," he began, his voice hoarse, "I can explain." "Explain what?" she snapped, her voice sharp with a pain she hadn't known she still possessed. "That the man I saved, the man I sheltered, is the son of the king who exiled my family and condemned me to this life, that you watched me struggle knowing who you were and said nothing?" Her eyes, usually so warm and expressive, were now like chips of ice. "Did you enjoy the irony, you prince? The exiled traitor's daughter nursing the future king?" Alaric flinched as if struck. "It wasn't like that," he pleaded, reaching out a hand, but Lyra recoiled as if burned. "I was in no position to reveal myself. My life was in danger. I was searching for answers, away from the court, and I never wanted to deceive you, Lyra. My feelings for you, the gratitude, the respect, they are real." But Lyra was beyond reasoning. The raw wound of her past had been ripped open, raw and bleeding. The image of her father, unjustly imprisoned, her mother's tear-streaked face as they were driven from the city, flashed before her eyes. Alaric, in that moment, embodied everything she hated about Eldoria. Its deceit, its cruelty, its relentless pursuit of power. "Real?" she scoffed, a humourless laugh escaping her lips. "What could possibly be real between a banished outcast and a prince? We are worlds apart, Alaric. You are a lie." He stood before her, stripped bare of his disguise, a prince in ragged clothes, his face etched with profound despair. He was no longer the wounded stranger she had pitied, but the symbol of her ruin. Yet, even in her anger, Lyra couldn't deny the flicker of pain she saw in his sapphire eyes. a mirror to her own anguish. He was not without suffering. She knew that much, but the weight of his identity and the chasm it created between them felt insurmountable. "I need time," Lyra finally said, her voice trembling. "To think, to breathe." She turned and walked away, seeking refuge in the solitude of the forest, the only place that had offered her solace for years. Alaric watched her go, his hand outstretched, then slowly falling to his side, his gaze fixed on her retreating form until she disappeared amongst the trees. The forest, once a haven of quiet understanding, was now a battleground of shattered trust and burgeoning, yet complicated love. The dance of secrets had ended, but the dance of hearts, broken and conflicted, was just beginning. Lyra walked for hours, the biting wind mirroring the turmoil in her soul. Every step was an attempt to outrun the revelation, to outrun the pain that clawed at her heart. The image of Alaric, no longer a stranger but a prince, haunted her. How could she have been so blind, so trusting? The kindness he had shown, the quiet companionship, now felt tainted, a cruel charade. Yet, beneath the betrayal, a deeper, more unsettling truth gnawed at her. She had grown to care for him, profoundly so. The warmth she had felt in his presence, the quiet understanding they had shared, was not easily dismissed. When she finally returned to the cabin, exhausted and emotionally raw, Alaric was gone. A wave of panic, cold and swift, washed over her. Had he left? Abandoned her after his brother's threats? Just as despair threatened to consume her, she saw a note pinned to the door by his hunting knife, a stark contrast to his usual silent demeanour. His handwriting was elegant, precise, unmistakably aristocratic. "Lyra, forgive me. My silence was born of necessity, not deceit. Gareth has returned with more men. They will scour these lands. I cannot risk you. My family's conflict is not yours. But know this, my feelings are true. I go to face them, to protect you, and to reclaim what is mine. Not for power, but for justice, I will return. Wait for me." The words, though a balm, also brought a fresh wave of fear. He was going to face them, the king, his father, Gareth, his treacherous brother. The full weight of his royal burden and his decision to confront it settled upon Lyra. And then another detail caught her eye. At the bottom of the note, scrawled almost as an afterthought, was a small, familiar symbol. A soaring falcon, the crest of Eldoria, but with a broken wing. It was a subtle alteration, a silent rebellion against the tyranny of his own house. Just as Lyra processed the enormity of his departure, the distinct sound of snapping twigs broke the forest's silence. Not one, but many. This was no lone patrol, it was a search party. Gareth, true to his word, had returned. Lyra's heart pounded. She had to flee. But as she moved to gather her meagre belongings, a memory flashed. Alaric, weakened and feverish, his hand brushing hers, the jolt of connection. He had chosen to confront his destiny for her. She couldn't abandon him, not now, not when he was walking into a nest of vipers. She scanned the note again, the words, "I will return," echoing in her mind. But what if he didn't? What if he was captured? Or worse, a fierce resolve hardened her features. She would not wait passively. She would not be the helpless maiden. She was Lyra, the banished daughter of Eldoria, and she would fight for what she believed in, and for the man who, despite his secrets, had earned a place in her heart. With a deep breath, Lyra extinguished the fire. Plunging the cabin into darkness, she slipped out the back entrance, a silent phantom in the twilight. She knew these woods better than any royal scout. She would follow Alaric, a shadow in his wake, ready to strike, ready to protect, ready to defy the very kingdom that had cast her out, all for the sake of the prince who had, against all odds, captured her untrusting heart. The revelation of his identity had been a painful blow, but it also ignited a fierce, protective fire within her. The trail Alaric left was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Lyra, with her hunter's instincts, followed it like a ghost in the deepening twilight. She moved through the forest with a desperate urgency, the ache in her heart a constant companion. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant call of a night bird sounded like a warning. Her initial anger at Alaric's deception had begun to morph into a different kind of pain, a fear for his safety and a dawning understanding of the impossible position he had been in. As she drew closer to the edge of the royal lands, the forest thinned, giving way to cultivated fields and eventually the distant, imposing walls of Eldoria's capital. Lyra's breath hitched. She hadn't seen those walls in years, not since her banishment. A wave of bitter memories washed over her. The jeering crowds, the stern faces of the guards, the final, humiliating decree. She pushed the memories down, focusing on her task. She found Alaric on the outskirts of the capital, not alone. He stood facing a small contingent of royal guards, led by Gareth, who was now mounted on a magnificent warhorse, his face a sneering mask of triumph. The scene was stark, lit by the torches of the guards. "Brother," Gareth's voice carried on the night air, heavy with malice. "You've been found. And you, Lyra, lurking in the shadows, are you here to aid in this treason?" Lyra stepped forward, unwilling to hide, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. Alaric's eyes met hers across the torchlit clearing, a flash of surprise, then profound relief, mixed with a chilling fear for her. "Lyra, no!" he cried, his voice laced with desperation. "I won't abandon you," she declared, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tension. "Not when you're walking into a trap." Gareth laughed, a cruel, cold sound. How touching! The traitor's daughter and the runaway prince, a perfect pair. Arrest them both, and make sure our dear brother is handled with care. Father will want him alive to face his treason. Before the guards could move, Alaric unleashed a raw, primal energy Lyra had never witnessed. A shimmering blue aura, like concentrated moonlight, flared around him. He moved with impossible speed, disarming two guards with a blur of motion, his hands glowing faintly. His eyes, fixed on Gareth, burned with an unearthly intensity. "I will not let you harm her," he growled, his voice deep, resonant, and no longer just human. This was the secret he carried, the strange power hinted at in his past. He wasn't just a prince, he was something more, something ancient and powerful, perhaps even cursed. Gareth's eyes widened in fear, a flicker of genuine terror in his usually arrogant gaze. "He's possessed!" he shrieked, rallying his men. "He's a demon! Strike him down!" The guards hesitated, clearly unnerved by Alaric's sudden display of power, but their numbers were overwhelming. Arrows rained down, and swords clashed. Alaric, despite his incredible speed and strength, was still recovering from his wounds, and the sheer force of numbers began to overwhelm him. He fought with a desperate ferocity, always positioning himself to protect Lyra, who, despite her shock at his abilities, quickly joined the fray, her bow singing, her arrows finding their marks with lethal precision. But the odds were stacked against them. A blow from behind struck Alaric, and the shimmering aura flickered, then died. He stumbled, falling to one knee. Gareth, seeing his advantage, spurred his horse forward, a triumphant smirk on his face, his sword raised high. "Finish him!" he roared. Lyra, seeing the fatal blow coming, screamed, her heart tearing in two. Time seemed to slow. Gareth's sword, a glinting arc of steel, descended towards Alaric's exposed head. Lyra, fueled by a primal surge of terror and love, moved without thought. She threw herself forward, tackling Alaric to the ground, shielding him with her own body, just as the blade sliced through the air, embedding itself in the earth where his head had been moments before. Lyra! Alaric's voice was raw with anguish as he pulled her up, his eyes wide with horror at her reckless bravery. The guards, momentarily stunned, regrouped. Gareth, furious at being thwarted, snarled, "Take them alive, both of them." The sheer weight of their numbers was crushing. Soon, Lyra and Alaric were overwhelmed, disarmed and bound, their struggles ultimately futile. The humiliation of capture, of being dragged back to the very kingdom that had banished her, settled heavy on Lyra. But what truly broke her heart was the haunted look in Alaric's eyes, a silent apology for bringing her back to this nightmare. They were brought before King Theron, Alaric's father, in the opulent throne room of Eldoria. The king was a stern, aging man, his face a roadmap of power and disillusionment. Gareth stood smugly at his side. Lyra, standing beside Alaric, her hands bound, met the king's gaze with defiant pride. This was the man who had ruined her family, and she would not cower. "Alaric," the king boomed, his voice resonating through the vast hall, "you stand accused of desertion, consorting with a known traitor's daughter, and using forbidden powers. For this, the penalty is death." A gasp rippled through the assembled courtiers. "However," the king continued, his gaze sweeping over Lyra, "I am willing to offer a reprieve. You will be stripped of your claim to the throne, exiled permanently to the Western Marches, and your forbidden powers will be bound forever by the royal sorcerers. In exchange, this woman, Lyra, will face the full extent of the law for her treason and for aiding you. Her life will be forfeit." A collective murmur filled the hall. Alaric's head snapped up, his sapphire eyes blazing with an unholy fire, the hint of his hidden power flickering dangerously. "No!" he roared, straining against his bonds. "You cannot! She is innocent. Her family was innocent." "Silence, boy," the king thundered. "This is my decree. Your choice is clear. Your life and a diminished future, or her death." Lyra's heart sank. She looked at Alaric, her gaze pleading. He was being asked to choose between his existence, however diminished, and her life. He was being asked to condemn her, but in his eyes she saw not indecision, but a fierce, unwavering love. "I choose her," Alaric said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, echoing through the silent hall. "I choose Lyra. If she dies, I die. There is no other path for me, and if you think to strip me of my powers, Father, you will find it is not so easily done. These powers are a part of me, a legacy of our ancestors, cursed or not. They are mine to command, and I will use them to protect those I love, even if it means tearing this kingdom apart." His declaration was met with stunned silence. Lyra's eyes, filled with tears she refused to shed, met his. In that moment, all the pain of his deception, all the bitterness of her past, dissolved into the overwhelming clarity of his love, his sacrifice. He was willing to lose everything for her, and she, in turn, felt a surge of strength, a readiness to face any fate by his side. The impossible choice had been made, not out of duty, but out of a love so profound it defied kingdoms and curses. King Theron stared at his son, his face a canvas of shock, fury, and a flicker of something akin to grudging respect. Alaric's defiant declaration, his raw power, had shaken the foundations of the court. Gareth, pale and furious, could only watch as his schemes crumbled. The courtiers whispered, some terrified, others intrigued by the unprecedented display of a prince choosing love over a kingdom. "You speak of justice, father," Alaric continued, his voice resonating with power, "but your justice is blind. You banished Lyra and her family for speaking truth. You exiled me because you feared my unique abilities, a power that has been passed down through our royal line for generations, a power that could be a blessing, not a curse. My ancestor, King Elias, who bore this same power, saved Eldoria from the shadow blight. You have forgotten our history, father, and in doing so, you have broken our kingdom." His words struck a chord. Many elders in the court remembered the legends of Elias, a king with the heart of starlight power, who had indeed saved Eldoria in a time of great peril. Gareth tried to interject, but Alaric silenced him with a single, furious glance that made his brother flinch. "Lyra's family committed no treason," Alaric pressed on, turning to the king. "They merely exposed corruption within the royal council, corruption that you allowed to fester. It is time for Eldoria to heal, to embrace truth, not fear. It is time to welcome back those you wronged." The king, for the first time in his reign, looked truly conflicted. He saw the strength in his son's eyes, the unwavering conviction. He saw the loyalty in Lyra's fierce gaze, a woman who would stand by his son even unto death. He saw the flickering blue aura, a manifestation of the very power he had tried to suppress, but which now radiated protection and righteous defiance. A long, agonizing silence settled over the throne room. Finally, King Theron let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping. "Alaric," he said, his voice devoid of its usual authority, "what is it you truly ask?" "I ask for justice, father," Alaric replied, his gaze unwavering. "For Lyra and her family, for an end to this reign of fear, I ask to return to Eldoria. Not as a king who rules through fear, but as a prince who inspires truth. And I ask that Lyra, my chosen companion, stands beside me, not as a banished outcast, but as a respected member of this court, for she embodies the very spirit of honesty and courage that Eldoria needs." The king looked at Lyra, a profound transformation in his gaze. He saw not a traitor's daughter, but a woman of strength and unwavering devotion, a reflection of the qualities he himself had once valued. He saw the silent, powerful love between them, a force that could either destroy or rebuild his kingdom. "So be it," King Theron finally decreed, his voice softer, laced with a newfound wisdom. "Lyra and her family shall be pardoned, their lands and titles restored. Alaric, you will assume your place as my heir, and together we will cleanse Eldoria of the corruption that has plagued it, and may the bond you two share be a beacon of hope for our kingdom." Tears streamed down Lyra's face, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief and joy. Alaric, released from his bonds, stepped towards her, his eyes shining. He gently cradled her face in his hands, his touch warm, reassuring. "You waited for me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Always," she replied, her heart soaring. In the grand throne room, surrounded by courtiers, amidst the quiet murmurs of a changing kingdom, Alaric leaned down and kissed Lyra, a kiss that spoke of lost time, enduring love, and a future reclaimed. The sunlight, streaming through the grand stained glass windows, illuminated them in a soft, ethereal glow, transforming the ancient hall into a sanctuary of true love and hope. It was a kiss that sealed not just their fate, but the destiny of an entire kingdom, proving that sometimes